All right, thanks. So yeah, my name's Dave Branscome. I'm a cloud solutions architect at Microsoft, and with me is Bill Gilbert, the executive vice president at Catalyte.io. So as you can probably derive from the title of this presentation, this is not strictly speaking a technology topic, but as you'll see, there are ways that technology can actually help us to address the problem of unconscious bias at work. And Bill Gilbert's going to help us understand how that can actually be done in a practical way. If we move forward here, let's hope that by March 2021, we are able to have physical conferences again. And if that's the case, then the M365 Collaboration Conference will be in Las Vegas, Nevada. So hopefully we'll see everybody there. We've got our sponsors to thank for helping us put together this presentation and this event. So a big shout out to them. And then as far as me, this is me. This is what I look like since I'm not on video. I'm a senior security architect at Microsoft. I've been at Microsoft for about 12 years now, and really love the company. It's a great company to work for. I am based out of North Carolina in the USA. So if you're not in the US and are not sure where North Carolina is, most people know where New York and where Florida are. If you go right in the middle on the East Coast, that's where North Carolina is. And we're getting ready to have a minor hurricane sometime this week, so that'll be interesting. All right, let's get into this. So we all know that people and families and couples and things like that, they come in every shape, size, color combination that you can possibly imagine. Probably every workplace that you've been a member of, that I've been a member of, has some single people, some couples, families, extended families. Everybody has a unique and different situation that they come from. Unfortunately, what we tend to see is that there's a tendency for us as humans to gravitate or to show preference to maybe a particular gender, a particular race, a culture, an age group, a language preference, different family structures, educational backgrounds. The list goes on and on forever. There's any number of reasons why a person would show bias toward another human. And workplace bias has been an issue for many years now. So the question we want to talk about today is, could I be guilty of an unintentional form of workplace bias? And how do we start to overcome this tendency? So I love to tell stories. So that's what most of this is going to be about. Here's some stories for consideration. So down here at the bottom, there's a YouTube video. This is a TED Talk by a woman named Yasmin Abdel Magyed. I'm not sure I got the name pronounced correctly, but she's telling a story about the first blind auditions that were conducted by the Boston Symphony Orchestra back in 1952. So before that year, before the 1950s, orchestras around the world were, for the most part, comprised of male musicians. And in fact, in 1952, most orchestras were about 95% male. And it was at that point, or at that time, it was generally believed that men were just better musicians than women. Now, with the benefit of hindsight, we know that that's obviously blatantly incorrect. There is no genetic marker for being a good musician. But in 1952, the Boston Symphony Orchestra decided to put that thinking to the test. And so they decided to hold blind auditions, meaning that the musicians played while while they were hidden behind screens, so that the judges couldn't see whether it was a man or a woman that was playing. So it seemed reasonable. After a few rounds of auditions, the judges were surprised to see that they were still, even blindly, choosing men over women, and they couldn't figure out why. They didn't believe that it was just a matter of pure skill or musicianship. And in fact, many of the women that were auditioning, there was a woman named Dorio Dwyer Um, she was considered by many to be an absolute musical genius because she was so tremendously skilled at her craft, and she didn't pass the audition. So everyone was puzzled. They didn't understand why, if the experiment was designed to give equal advantage to both genders, why were the scales still tipping in favor of men? And they figured it out. In that era, women typically wore dress shoes with heels that when the women were walking across the wooden stage, it produced a distinctive click. And that was giving their gender away, even in blind audition. So even unconsciously, the judges were applying a different standard, even though they knew that the intent of the process was to be impartial. So to fix the problem, the judges had everybody remove their shoes before the audition. And then this time around, more than 50% of the women passed the audition round, which more accurately reflected the skills of the women. But the point that we're making here is there was an unconscious, or in some cases, maybe there was even a deliberate bias that was being applied, even though the stated intent was to be fair. So we all like to think of ourselves as being fair people, as being reasonable people, but could something like that be clouding your views of a colleague? Let's look at another scenario. American kitchens in the 50s and 60s reflected a bit of unconscious bias as well. So in the 50s and 60s, most of the people that were in the architectural field in the US were men. And so that resulted in kitchens being designed around what a 6 foot tall man would need to be able to do in a kitchen. So that meant that counter heights were higher, cabinet shelves were higher, sinks were set higher, and so on. And the result was that kitchens were not necessarily as useful as they really could have been because they were designed for a specific gender and a specific size of person. So this didn't account for people that might be in a wheelchair, for example, or people that were just smaller than 6 feet. So when more women began entering the architectural field in the 70s, kitchens began changing. And when that happened, it really kicked off what many architects consider to be a renaissance in kitchen design, because the women had an entirely different perspective of what was useful and how it would work effectively. So again, what's the point? Well, no matter what we believe about ourselves, we all have biases about people and about things that impact our beliefs about their abilities. Those biases can unintentionally then lead us to make bad choices about how to use people's skills and their strengths. And that can have a negative effect in many different ways. If you think about it, these unconscious biases can have a detrimental effect on the workplace because it could prevent us from hiring the right people or not considering their opinions to carry the same weight or value as those of other people. It can cause us to make people feel unwelcome and maybe want to work somewhere else. And so that could actually deprive our company of a valuable asset. So how do we prevent unconscious bias from sneaking into our actions at work? We're going to talk about 3 traits that we can develop and start to display in our daily interactions that can help us to avoid this type of bias. So awareness. Now, if you think about it, pre-COVID-19, it was a challenging job market for many areas. With the impact of COVID-19 and the huge impact on the economy, it's probably going to get even more challenging. Now, imagine the complexity of finding gainful employment in, for example, the tech sector when you have autism. So the young man in the picture, his name is Philip Jarvis. He's a computer science graduate, and he was recently hired by Microsoft. So if we're realistic, it's likely that his new career wouldn't have even been possible just a few years ago. especially if his performance during the interview had been measured in the same way that non-autistic candidates were being evaluated. But because Microsoft has what we call this autism hiring program, Philip had the opportunity to actually think more about some of his responses to the interview. He was able to think about this long after the interview, after he went back to his hotel room and started thinking about it. He actually emailed the interviewer and explained a better way to work through the problem that he had been asked to solve, and that was accepted. Now, he was hired and he now works on the HoloLens team. So he helps people to understand how to make the product better, able to respond to gestures, voice, other types of input. So the point that's being made here is try to be aware of other people's situations, right? We can't measure people by a single set of criteria that is unique to us. Everybody has a different set of circumstances. So if you have a strong reaction to somebody, whether it's a strong positive reaction or a negative reaction, ask yourself why you feel that way. Try to be honest with yourself and figure out if there's an unconscious bias that's sneaking into your thought process. And do your best to listen to people until they feel understood, not until you feel like you understand them, but until they feel like they've gotten the point across that they need to make. And that may take a little bit of time, a little bit of patience, but that's how we find the real gems, the diamonds in the rough, like Philip Jarvis here. The next area is courage, and courage. When we talk about courage, we're talking about the ability to stand up and ensure that everybody's voice, everybody's perspective is heard, and that you work to correct misunderstandings and solve any disagreements. Now, this is an interesting quote from Winston Churchill. It said, "Courage is rightly esteemed the first of human qualities because it's the quality that guarantees all others." So I'll let you think about that for a minute. Why do you think Churchill said this? Why did he consider courage to be such an important quality to be exhibited by people? Well, it takes courage to stand up for other people. It takes courage to try to correct misunderstandings, to resolve disagreements. And that's especially true in workplaces, especially when there's a measure of competition. And in many competitive companies, outshining other people, outperforming other people is the way that a person achieves position or promotion. So being courageous in that type of environment may mean ensuring that everyone is given a voice, regardless of their gender, their race, their title, how well they speak your language. Everyone needs to be given the same opportunity to contribute to the conversation without any prejudgment. Now, if you think about any leader that you admire, maybe it's a political leader, a leader in technology, a religious leader, a sports star, it could be anyone, really. The ones who are most admired, the ones who have the most loyal following, are the people who raise up others with them. It's not the leaders that run roughshod over others. Now, there's definitely an element that will follow that group, but in most cases, you get the most loyalty from people by helping them to achieve greater things. So being able to stand up for others in that way is a sign of strength. It's a sign of compassion. And that, I believe, is part of what Churchill was saying here. Unless you can stand up for those who would otherwise be denied their voice, you're contributing to the bias problem. The truth is, it takes courage to make almost any forward progress in life because you don't know exactly how things will turn out, really ever, right? Making a job change, who you decide to marry, where you decide to live. You don't know exactly how those things will turn out. And so that's why courage is such a rare quality. People like to stick to what they know, even if what they know isn't something that they necessarily agree with. They don't want to stand out, but a courageous person isn't afraid to stand up for others, even if the position that they're taking isn't one that's terribly popular. The third point is curiosity, listening to the ideas of others, seeking their contributions. Now, the woman in this picture is Hedy Lamarr. So she was an actress in the early 30s. At the time, she was considered by many to be the most beautiful woman in the world. And there's no doubt she's beautiful. But did you know that she's also the person who made your cell phone possible? Surprised? So in her life, she improved the design of traffic lights. She invented a tablet that dissolved into a soft drink. She reimagined the wings of a fuel-efficient plane for Howard Hughes. But her most enduring invention is what we see back here. And she used her maiden name, Hedy Markey, in this patent application. What she created here was an invention that was a form of what we call frequency hopping. That was the forerunner of Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, and GPS, which all sit on your cell phone right now. Now, this invention was intended to make it possible for the Allies during World War II to guide their torpedoes to the target using a signal that hopped between frequencies. And that constant changing of frequencies would prevent the enemies from locking onto the torpedo and jamming it. Now, when she presented this invention to the Navy in World War II, they dismissed it. But decades later, it was rediscovered and became the inspiration for what we call spread spectrum technology that's the basis for GPS technology today. So her ideas were dismissed, maybe because of who she was, maybe because of being a woman, maybe because of how she looked. And that oversight, that lack of curiosity about her ideas may have cost lives in the North Atlantic shipping lanes in World War II. So how can we begin to eliminate these types of biases from the hiring process? Now, one of the partners that I work with, the partner's name is Catalyte.io. They are eliminating that bias in a very unique way. They use artificial intelligence to accomplish this. So I'd like to introduce to our discussion Bill Gilbert. He's the Executive Vice President of Catalyte.io. Bill, I want to thank you for being willing to tell the Catalyte story.
Yes, no problem, David. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so can you start off by telling us how you have worked, how Catalyte has worked to eliminate unconscious bias in your recruitment process?
We look very specifically to find software engineers. We believe that aptitude to be a great software engineer is all around us, but opportunity to become a software engineer might not necessarily be available to all. So we have an online assessment. It uses, as you mentioned, AI and machine learning algorithms to identify people who have innate aptitude to be software engineers. We don't ask any kinds of questions on this assessment that might indicate ethnicity or age or gender, education. We just want to know who has great cognitive ability and innate aptitude to be a software engineer. Once we identify them, we train them up, full stack developers, and turn out a great set of software engineers from places that you might not expect to find software engineers. In fact, about 48% of our graduates don't have a college degree. We find far more women, far more diverse population of software engineers.
That's really amazing. And I mean, if you think about the comparison between the way you're doing things and the typical way that you would apply at a company, all the questions that you're talking about are those indicators that would tell you, maybe ethnicity or race or gender or the age of the person, all those things that could cause those biases to exist in the hiring process. So, as you've used this tool, what have been the results that you've seen?
It's kind of like the high heels story that you told at the Boston Symphony Orchestra, where maybe even inadvertently hearing those high heels click across the floor gave an indication that it was a woman that was doing the audition. In our case, we don't know until we've actually seen the scores, compiled the list of our cohort, and we seat typically 15 to 20 people in a class. We don't know until we call them up and find out if they're interested, and if they want to take our training. One of your comments about courage, I think, is important to mention, because a lot of people take our assessment and they think it's a scam. They think it's why would they want to train me? And what they learn is that we are so confident. It's been about 20 years developing this model. We're so confident that we will find people that have aptitude to be a software engineer, that we train them at no cost. So when they come, they have the courage to come take our class. We graduate, I don't know, about 80% of the people who decide to take the class, and they go on to become some of the most wonderful software engineers in the world. About 90% of our graduates are still in technology after they graduate. And we measure all along the way, so we continually have reinforced data that shows that our engineers are outperforming great in the marketplace.
And I think you showed me a slide that showed where some of these graduates have gone on to work. I know Microsoft was one of them, Amazon, but what were some of the others?
Well, here's the other thing. We start off with becoming software engineers, and these people might be plumbers or landscapers or teachers or whomever, but they have this aptitude. So once they become software engineers, this aptitude opens up a whole new world for them, a whole new career opportunity. We now have graduates who are CTOs. So they start off as software engineers, but obviously in a 20-year career, you continue to move up, and we're changing lives. I notice in Denver, which is where I'm at, I ride up the elevator with some of the people who are going into our latest cohort. This is pre-COVID, obviously, but I am amazed at the stories I hear from them and what they were doing before they took this chance to take an assessment and become a software engineer. And it's a remarkable kind of life-changing experience that I think we're providing.
That's fantastic. I love hearing more about your story, and you're a great storyteller too. Now is this program still available right now with the COVID stuff impacting so many people? I imagine there might even be people that are watching this session that are curious about whether you've put that on hold or what's going on.
No, maybe even more so now. I mean, so many people are looking to, our economy has been jolted, and so many people are looking for different careers, and our ability to find people who have an aptitude to be software engineers it's amazing. They're out there, they're everywhere. And so we have an opportunity to find and train them. We will be, as a country, working remotely more often and having to try to figure out ways to train and contribute in remote environments, as well as being on site. So our world is busy as it's ever been, and maybe even more so. And I think the future of how we operate in the world today might even lend itself more to what we're doing. We're actually in partnership with other companies who are trying to retrain America in a much broader sense. And so on our website, there's some some discussion about how we partner with people who don't only train for technology like we do, but also just train in a much broader sense. Maybe they train nurses or other professionals that are needed in the post-COVID world. And so how can we find the people out in the US that need these career changes and these career opportunities and provide a mechanism for them to get trained? We're participating in those kinds of things as well. So we're growing.
Such a really cool story. I really appreciate you taking the time here, Bill. So anybody that's watching the session, the Catalyte story is here on this video. It's a very compelling story by itself. Is that the CEO of the company, Bill, that's presenting that? I don't remember what his title was. Yeah.
Oh, well, that story itself is from our founder, Mike Rosenbaum, who's actually a Harvard professor who 20 years ago came up with the notion that how do we identify people who might have this aptitude without interjecting our own bias? And so the video is fascinating on how 20 years ago he had thought about this and came up with some of these ideas.
Awesome. And then the exam that Bill was referencing can be found here. So if anybody watching the session wants to register for this exam, go to www.retrainamerica.com, take the exam, and like Bill was saying, this is going to use artificial intelligence, machine learning to identify indicators that would seem to indicate that you have a propensity for software development. Is that a fair way to say that, Bill?
Yeah. And we don't, the algorithms, there's over 500 data points, and the algorithms are, they're self-learning, and they determine the variables and the weighting of those variables, not a human. So over time, the model continually learns and trains itself to find successful engineers.
How many people would you estimate take the exam each year?
I don't know if I know that. And before COVID, we were in a training center kind of model. We are now doing that, but also adding the ability to be remote and starting cohorts that might start this month, but have students across the country. And they will collectively as a class go through the modules and then graduate as a class, but not all in one place necessarily. So we are evolving as well in the post-COVID world and finding engineers and training them up. And maybe the instructor will be in Denver, but the class will be across the country in Portland, Baltimore, Chicago, Denver, etc.
Really, really nice story. Thank you so much, Bill, for joining.
Well, thank you very much for letting me tell the story. It changes lives, and it's fun to see it happen.
Yeah, hopefully you'll get some really good candidates just from this session. That'd be nice to see.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So I think it goes without saying that eliminating bias altogether in the workplace is a massive undertaking, but it is possible to make progress. It starts with each individual. Each of us can start by being more aware of where our own biases might lie and actively try to understand why we have them, how they're manifested, so that we can work to reduce their impact, reduce the times that they're shown during the day. We can also have the courage to ensure that those people are heard in the workplace, that their ideas, their suggestions are valued during meetings and discussions. And lastly, we can be curious, learn what the strengths, the perspectives, the ideas, the contributions of others on your team are, and how they contribute overall to your team's strength. So eliminating bias is not going to happen overnight. There's no magic wand that's going to be waved and everybody immediately changes. But if we can make our own teams better, maybe just within the scope of our 5-10 person team, if we make it better for those who do have a different background than we do, that's a really good start. So thank you for your time and attention. Please provide feedback on this session as well as the event itself. Make sure that you sign up for the raffle. They're going to be giving away 3 Oculus Quests. So go to the URL down here, submit your answers to enter the raffle. And then think about donating to some of the groups that are out there on the front lines fighting COVID-19. Certainly a valuable effort that they're making, and we want to support them. So does anybody have any questions? I know we have a little bit of time left, so we're happy to answer questions. I think, Bill, if you have the availability to answer some questions, that'd be great. I'm sure people have some things for you. But yep. if you'd like to come off mute or answer questions or ask questions in the chat, feel free to. Sharik, are there any questions for us?
Yeah, so firstly, just like to say thank you to both of you, David and Bill. That was very interesting. We have one question here, which is using AI to eliminate bias in a hiring process. Are we able to expand a bit on that, please?
Yeah, it might be better described as being machine learning. We test, so we have our assessment about 2.5 hours, and then as we train people and deploy them on agile development teams, we're measuring all along the way on things like cost per story point, defects per 1,000 lines of code, whatever you can possibly measure for a software engineer, and we feed that back into the model. Through machine learning, the model figures out which variables are predictive of higher scores that we're measuring, and we continue to retrain that model. So it might be better described as a machine learning, a way to develop algorithms to find characteristics of people who have great aptitude to be a software engineer.
Sure. And is it also for non-US, or is it just for the US?
Right now, it's just US based. We have talked about doing this in other locales, but there is a cultural kind of, language and culture kind of inputs that we need to, our model needs to be trained on people who think about and communicate in slightly different ways.